All right. Welcome on this cloudy and dreary Thursday afternoon. Today you'll be glad you came. Today, as I talked about last class, we'll be dealing with a layout technology, a couple of layout technologies. One of them is called Flexbox, right? Which we've had a little bit of dealings with when we talk about the Bootstrap framework for the Bootstrap Grid for layout. The other technology that we're going to work with today is called CSS Grid. And this is actually a really important development in web technologies for CSS, but for the larger web development community at large, because we've been waiting for this tool for probably about 20 years. I remember doing web development in 1999, and the only layout tools we had, we didn't even have good support back then for CSS. So the only reliable way you had to lay out anything on your page was a table. And you put tables within table cells, and then you put table cells within those table cells. And the code was horribly heavy. It was easy to break. It was a disaster. It was awful. And it did the trick. It worked, but it was definitely not elegant. So we've been waiting for a way to lay out a page that is purely CSS powered, so that we don't have to have anything in our content, in our markup, that describes how it looks, that is purely powered with CSS, and that just works everywhere across all screens, all user agents, wherever. And we finally have it. Now, to say we finally have it, can you use the CSS grid in the way that we're going to use it today for production purposes? The answer is sort of. And by sort of, I mean that we're just at pretty much right now at the point where modern browsers all reliably support this. So that's good. But we probably don't have any production web applications that use it, right? So we're going to show this to you, and you're going to be able to take this technology, put it in your back pocket, and you're going to be able to walk into wherever you're going to be employed, and you're going to say, I understand CSS Grid. And they're going to be like, what are you talking about? Right? It's that, I mean, there's virtually zero awareness of this. And so this really is a bleeding edge technology, but the beauty of this is it's actually relatively simple. And it's powerful and it's flexible. You're going to be like, wow, why didn't we do this in the first place? Well, you know, these things take time, but finally it's here. Like, this is a day that I've personally been waiting for a very long time. Since I started teaching CSS in 2003, I've been waiting for the day when I could actually teach grid-based layout using pure CSS. And this is the first day I've ever been able to do that. So for me, it's a really big day. I think for those of you who have struggled to do layout with HTML, CSS, you'll be amazed. For those who haven't, you're lucky that you didn't have to go through some of those trials and tribulations. You really are the benefactor of all the hard work that's gone into bringing the technology here. But this is truly awesome. And I mean, this is so cool. You know, for example, some of you may have had Jarrett Wright as an instructor. So he teaches Java programming in Computer Programmer, and Java now has very, very good support for CSS. So now we're talking about a layout technology that moves beyond just web front end. It's moving into other platforms, right? It's really incredible. It's really, really cool. Now, so the only downside to this is you'll have to forgive me. I'm probably going to make several mistakes today as I've tried to wrap my head around this. It's just so foreign to the way I think about layout and CSS. It's such a paradigm shift in the way that I've typically taught this and talked about it. It really involved me kind of retooling my own mind to try and figure this out. So stay with me, bear with me. This is going to be kind of like you might feel like a little bit like a crash test dummy, but that's cool. This is what it takes to kind of stay on the the bleeding edge of this stuff. But as a result, you're going to come away with some tools today, some layout tools that very, very few people are knowledgeable of, and even less are comfortable using. So anyway, this is super cool. All right, so to that end, let's head over here into Learning Modules, and I've organized this into. Let's turn off my edit mode. Don't need that. Down here, Module 7, Flexbox. So we're gonna cover two technologies today, and then I'm going to unleash you on a lab, on Lab 7, which will be focused squarely on grid. But first of all, we're gonna go through Flexbox and try and get you comfortable understanding how to use flexible boxes in CSS, and then we're going to take that and so Flexbox can be used in combination with the grid, no problem. So Flexbox is more designed for arranging smaller bits and pieces on a screen, and grid is designed for larger based layouts, so kind of like more all-encompassing layouts that so to handle kind of everything that goes on the screen. And the Flexbox might be used. The intent was maybe just to use it for smaller pieces inside that grid. But there's no reason you can't build an entire layout based on Flexbox. But I think you'll find after today that the simplicity of the grid is pretty remarkable. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to cover Flexbox first. We're going to delve into grid. What are the parts of grid? And then we're going to get into excuse me. Then we're going to get into a lab where I throw out a sample kind of grid-based layout. I'm going to see if you can try and figure how to render that using the grid. Okay. All right. So stay with me. Let's go. So lesson files start. Pull down the start files. Save these to your Module 7. I know I skipped ahead to Module 8, so we're circling back to Module 7. That's all cool. Don't need that. Please extract these files. Windows users, that means you. I forgot to get rid of this. So get rid of the, there's an underscore Mac OS 10. If you're on Mac, you won't see it. If you're on Windows, you can get rid of the underscore Mac OS 10 directory or folder. Should just have lesson file start. And then in there, I've downloaded a reasonably fresh copy of Boilerplate to serve as kind of our baseline. And there's 3 files in here that we're going to deal with. One is Flexbox, the second one is Grid, and the third one is Lab 7 for your lab today. Okay. Cool. Now, so before I head out, a few things to talk about. There's a link here. It's called we'll start with Flexbox. So there's a link here called A Complete Guide to Flexbox. So if you click on this this link here, this goes to a place called CSS Tricks. So this is a kind of an unbelievable CSS resource by a guy by the name Chris Koye. If you ever have an opportunity to hear him speak at a conference or anything, do it. Anyway, this has kind of evolved as the place to, if you're wondering about how Flexbox works, this is the place to learn Flexbox. So everyone, you type in Flexbox in a search engine, this will be hit number 1. Always has been, and sounds like it always will be. So this is, people cite this particular resource all the time. So this steps us through the two parts of the Flexbox, which are basically the container, which is the element that contains the content, and then the content items or elements themselves, what we'll call the parent, the FlexContainer, and the children, which are the Flex items. Okay, so this walks you through, firstly, how you configure the container, the FlexContainer, right? You can see there's a lot more to the FlexContainer really than the and then we move over. Once you've configured that, then you have properties for the Flex items or the children inside that box. Okay, there's not quite as many. So we're going to go through these. There's a few of them that are kind of abstract in the way that they work and the way they render on the screen. So we'll try our best to kind of see if we can get this working and rendering the way it should. But it's pretty cool. So so that's why. The other thing that I think it's really important to use, particularly when you're using pretty new stuff. Particularly, so if we head over to caniuse.com, this has kind of evolved as one of the more popular kind of references for browser support of different technologies. So for example, if I say CSS Grid, I want to show you why we're at a very interesting point in history here. So anywhere that you see green, that is full support for the modern syntax for CSS Grid. So you can see really the place where we're kind of struggling here is IE 11. So we have partial support. You have to add MS prefixes to some of the properties to get it to work just so. But it's also important to note that IE is not a product that is going to continue, right? We're talking about now rolling forward into Edge. So current versions of Edge are supporting the modern syntax that we'll show you today. So that means Opera Mini, yes, no, that does not is not supporting Grid. So to be mindful if that's a significant part of your user base. I'm not sure what scenario that might be. The stock browser for Android, not supported, unfortunately. And Samsung Internet. I don't know if I've ever used that browser before. Okay, so all of our major browsing platforms support it very well. But this is the concern here. You've still got a pretty good global market share of IE, Internet Explorer. So this is why probably in production, would you deploy an app today using CSS Grid? Maybe not. Well, you could, as long as you made sure that you had the right -ms prefixes on your syntax. So you could. But I would say within the next year, yeah, I would start looking at this. Really, I would. You know, it's that cool. It's that simple and easy to use. So let's go. Let's take a look. So let's fire up our code editor here. We'll add a folder. Open a folder up with our files, our lesson files here, and see what we got. It was funny, I always, most of the time I'm working on OS 10 on Mac, and I have to keep reminding myself that when I'm on Windows, when I hit a maximize button, it actually like covers the whole screen. Like it makes, we don't really have I haven't figured out a way to do that on OS 10 in the same way. That's one feature of the Windows UI that I really like. So let's go here and take a look at Flexbox.html. Maybe that's a bit big. All right. So what have we got here? Nothing crazy. We're using boilerplate as our templating system. You'd put a language, whatever your content is, of course, you'd put the base language on the HTML element. Notice we have a class Node.js. This is because we have Modernizer down here. So Modernizer library is included. So once that runs, we'll get a list of capabilities of the user's browser. That's cool. I've added an ID flex to this page. I've done this because I'm going to use the same piece of CSS to power two different HTML templates, one for Flexbox and one for Grid. So I've added this. You won't find this in the boilerplate. That's just something that I added myself, just to keep things simple. Other than that, no tricks. So then we come down here to our markup. So I've got some bogus content here, and I've made no assumptions. This is not to say that you should be using a series of divs to mark up your content. This is to say that I can't make any assumptions about your semantics. It depends on your content, what elements you should use. So I'm just using divs because they're generic. But obviously, I'd like to see you using elements articles and sections and asides and headers and footers and mains and all those other good sectioning elements where appropriate. So that's cool. So we've got a primary container, which is our div, which is just a div, and then inside that div, I have 5 child elements. Each of those have a subhead and a paragraph in them with Greek content. That's it. So no real tricks. We'll take a look at that. We'll look at that in the front end here. So open that up in your browser. Doesn't really matter which one. So we'll open up flexbox.html. And you don't want to translate that because it doesn't mean anything. Okay, so what do I got here? So here are all those. You see the gray box around there? Little gray box, 5 pixel wide. That is the container div, so that's the parent div. And then each of these other divs containing an H2 and a paragraph have a different color. That's it. So I'll show you what I've done with the CSS. That's just so we can kind of visualize how they're going to behave. And inside, you'll see in the CSS, we're going to open up main.css. And you'll have to scream down here to the author's custom style, somewhere around about line 96. Oh, I have used a web font, so I'm pulling in Open Sans from the Google Web Font Services. So that's generally not part of boilerplate. So here we go. So Flexbox. So here we go. So the first things first is, so Flex here, this ID in the selector refers to the ID on the HTML element, right? So of course this little chevron here indicates direct descendant. So this is saying any div that is directly descendant from the body has these properties, right? So we've got the background is a light gray, and the border is 5 pixel solid gray, light gray. So that's why we have a border, or a 5 pixel border here. Then down below here, I've also used a direct descendant selector. So I'm saying any div that is a direct descendant of a div, that is direct descendant of a body, and Visual Studio Code pulls up actually a really nice, that's really helpful, right? It gives you an idea about, okay, well, how does this selector map to the document object model? That's super cool, right? It's a good code editor. So what we're saying is I'm just adding one padding of one root M. Root M means the M, one of the font size from the root element, the HTML. That's all it means, right? So all I'm doing here is just adding some space, some white space around the text so it's not jammed up against the edge. That's cool. And then what I do is I'm looking at using the nth of type to step through each of those divs. The first one, the first, is it first? No, it's first of type, second, third, fourth, so on and so forth, right? directly descended from the div, which is our container, which is in the body with the ID flex. So all I do here is set those various background colors using the background shorthand. No tricks. That's it. That's all we've set up. So laying it out this way, it's going to be super easy then, I think, to visualize how this flex box, how a flexible box works. So I need you to set aside any preconceptions you have or any thoughts about positioning, about inline and block, about positioning absolute or position static, floats, clears. You need to kind of do the Yoda thing and kind of empty your mind. Is that what Yoda said? Empty your mind? Or clear your mind, okay? Get rid of all that stuff. Pretend you don't know any of that, okay? That's really the only way to move forward with some of these layout tools. So, all right. So now that our mind is cleared of any and all preconceptions, we can look at Flexbox. So the first thing here, we want to define a flexible box. We need to head up to step number 1. Is we need to identify a parent or a container to be the flex container, right? To contain the children. So this is the box that contains it. So we'll define the div inside, the one div that's inside the body as the flexible box. So all we do here under step 1 is we use the display property, flex. No tricks. Really? That's it? Yep, that's it. Cool. Now if we head over here, save that, refresh the page, you'll notice something remarkable happens. Oh, what's going on? Nope. Never translate Latin. There we go. What has happened here? Right? So the default, what's happened is we have, when you're dealing with a flex box, get rid of this thing on the bottom here. When you're dealing with a flex box, we have to define the main axis. So are these children, are these boxes inside of that box, whatever they are, and you don't have to use a div, you can use a section, you can use an article, an aside, a paragraph, and whatever, right? Any block level element. You've got a box with things inside, with boxes inside it. You have to define, okay, are these boxes going to be flexible horizontally or vertically, right? So that's called the axis, or the main axis. So, or this is set up with the what we call the flex direction, right? So the default is row. We can say flex dash direction, and you can say row, or you can say column. So if you set them to column, for example, they will flex along a vertical axis. Okay, but the default is row. So we'll change it to row. Understanding though, if you set the display to flex, it's row anyway. You actually don't have to define it. Now, here's the interesting thing. I could say row dash row reverse, right? This would take a lot more code to do things, to do this with floats and clears, right? And we have to deal with some other things like, well, we have to deal with clears then, right? If we're dealing with floats. So we can swap around the order, right? So this is really cool to understand this because when we're dealing with truly modern CSS layout tools, we have to understand that the source order, so the content you have in your HTML, doesn't matter. You can arrange these things any way you want. All right, and we'll see this even more so with Grid and with Flexbox. But it's important to know. So it obviously now doesn't matter what order they've gone. I can swap the order around, right? I can say column reverse if I want. And I swap things around, right? So this is cool. And think about this too, because when you're dealing with JavaScript, say you're dealing with, I don't know, an interface that maybe serves up maybe a photo gallery. You're serving up a number of different images, and you want people to change the order of things. You can add a button to change, and it would change a class, which would add just flex direction, change the flex direction, just like that, right? You can change the class on that and swap it around. So think about all the functionality also that this affords you in terms of building an interesting interface that might do something neat for people, right? Without changing any of the markup. That's really super cool. So let's leave this with row. That's cool. Step 3. Okay, so determine how an element in the container will wrap. So this is where we have to think about, for example, like these. This is display row. If you can imagine that these boxes maybe had a they're adapting to the width of the screen quite nicely, based of course on the number. It's kind of optimized the width of these based on the content that each of these have, which is kind of nice, right? I haven't had to do anything in terms of figuring out, well, this one, let's figure out the height of the biggest one and make them like these are all equal heights. This is really nice. But if these were all a set width, for example, and the box or the screen is obviously only a set width, what if I run out of space? So how do I handle maybe the fourth? Maybe I can fit the first, second, and third box on the screen, but not the fourth and fifth. So what happens? Do I wrap those down to the next line? Those two boxes, right? Do I wrap them reverse, right? So how do I handle that? If you think about those boxes stacked in a row there, and when you have to break to a new line, for example, what does this look like? So this is the direction here is called FlexWrap. The property, and we can say wrap or wrap reverse. And we'll see how that works in a second. So now you can see. So what happens now is this with wrap. This element is now is as wide as it needs to be to encapsulate its content. But then, of course, this one doesn't fit anymore, so it has to wrap to a new line. I'll shrink down a little bit. Maybe you can see that better. Yeah, right? So now you can see in this case, this and this one, they fit, right? That's great, but now we have to break to a new line for this one, and then we wrap here. So I can do the reverse of that. I can say wrap dash reverse. So now it starts plotting them out here, wraps it up to the line above, and then wraps it up to the line above again. You may be like, why would I ever need to do that? You will come up against a situation sometime where your interface needs to wrap that direction, right? Don't always think in terms of English, right? Think also different languages wrap differently, right? Some read top to bottom, some read right to left, some read left to right. Just think about all these different reasons why perhaps maybe your content may want to wrap in a different direction. We'll leave this with wrap. I'll zoom this back out to normal. Okay, this is my normal size, so we can get a sense that 3A, where did I stash 3B? So 3B, we're going to set a width now on the flex children to see this behavior a little bit differently. So let's head down here to step 3B, which is somewhere around 197. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say all divs that are a direct descendant of a div that are direct descendant of the body. So this is all of these. This rule, this selector, will target all of these boxes, right? It's not specific. Let's set a width on all of them that it's the same. So let's say width, and you can use, I don't know, let's just say 200 pixels. So So now, of course, they all have a set width. They'll be of varying heights because they have different amounts of content within them. So height is still auto. But now, when at a certain point, now that they're a fixed width, when the containing box, when the containing flex box is too small, then we can see that wrap. You can see that wrapping behavior. That might be useful, right? You think about now, really, I've got an adaptable design, a responsive design that doesn't even need media queries. So if I have a small, like if I'm on a mobile phone, look at that. If I'm on a tablet, that's great. You know, tablet that's held sideways, landscape, on a desktop, right? Very simple, right? So not a ton of code was injured in this experiment, right? So that's pretty cool. Now, so let's head over now to step 3b. Have I done all? No, we're up to step 4. All right. Forgive me as I try and navigate my own code. Okay, so now the next thing is we can control the alignment of the flex children along the main axis with justifyContent. So what does this mean? So we'll go and pull up the complete guide to Flexbox here, and so there's FlexWrap. So FlexWrap, no, Flex justifyContent here. So you can imagine, I mean, we can do this. This is really interesting because this would take a fair bit of effort without this kind of content. But if we have a number of boxes of maybe varying widths or any widths whatsoever, maybe how do I want them to fit in this box? Do I want to arrange equal space around them? Do I just want space between them? So, you know, what do I do with the extra space in the box, right? How can I take advantage of that? So obviously the default is going to be flex start. So I'll add this on the container. So it's called justifyContent. So I can say flex dash start. That's the default. So there'd be no change. So we can then say flex end. Right? And they'll jam them to the end of the flex container and leave the space on the left. Now we can say we can center them. That's pretty useful, but it gets better. But wait, there's more. How about space between? Wow, now that's awesome.
This would take forever.
It would take forever. Like that was just a few handful of characters, and I'm done. Right? Auto heights. Look at that. Wow. Really? Why did you show us all that stuff before, Scott? Well, I don't know. Because I'm a masochist and I wanted to share the fun. No, not really. That's pretty cool. Now, what if with your layout you wanted also to have a little bit of space on the edges too, right? So this is space between, and then the last one, of course, is space around. Are you kidding me? Right? Yeah. The fun involved in doing that, you know, and look at this, and look, we snap over to a new row. I wouldn't even know where to start doing that with floats and clears and positioning, I wouldn't know where to start. Man, there isn't enough coffee. There just isn't. That's so awesome. So there you go. So there's right. We haven't even organized anything in terms of the Flex children yet. Right? This is just the Flex parent. We haven't even got to the properties that arrange each of those things inside the box yet. Wait and see. So, okay, 4A, where did I put, where did I stash 4B here? I think we're down here below. Oh, reduce the width of the Flex to see the justify content property. I suppose I could do that. No, I'll leave that. I was using percentages before, so yeah, no, we'll leave that. Leave step 4B for now. Fixed width is cool. I mean, you can change it to width. Say you change it to width. Oh, I don't know, 25%. So you can use obviously any number of different measures. 25%. It'll scale, but we'll obviously always wrap these two will always wrap to the next line because 75% plus it's not going to work, right? So yeah, you can do that. You can also use an interesting measure called let's just say maybe 33 viewport width. So that means 33% of the width of the viewport, and that's another relative measure too. Viewport width and viewport height are going to be coming more into vogue the more we get into kind of resolution independent screens, right? Where it doesn't really matter how many pixels I have. I just need so much of the screen, height and wise. So it's kind of an interesting way to look at things. I'll comment this out for now, and I'll just leave. We'll just leave width 200 pixels for now, a fixed width, for simplicity's sake. All right. Step 4B. I think we're up to 5. I think that wraps up step 4. Step 5. Align children on the cross axis with align items on the cross axis. I'll refresh those like that. This one kind of bends my mind around a bit. Align items on the right. Okay. So for this, what we have to do is set the height of the elements to naturally where they're going to be. So if the elements are of different heights, we can align them to the top of the box, the start of the box, the end of the box. We can line them along the vertical center. We can stretch, which is the default, which is what you see now. Or we can align them, if there's text inside them, we can align them on a baseline of the text, typographically. This takes a little bit of imagination. Inside, we used to have something called inside a table cell. We're using tables eons ago for layout. We would have something called vertical align, or V-align, I think it was. So aligning things vertically in this respect has always been a challenge, right? Flexbox solves all of this and takes care of it. So let's go, I think we have to change the, so let's go and change the display flex, FlexWrap. Justify content. Back to stretch. I'm trying to figure out where to. Set 5. Let me see how I did this. This is where I'm confused.
div.
I have to change the stretch. Cross axis. All right, let's check the justify content space around. Let's go into align items. Align items. And we're going to change them to flex start. No, because the default is stretch. If I don't say anything, the align item is a stretch. Okay. Okay. I got it. Okay. This is cool. So if I set the align items to flex start, the height now goes back to auto because the default is stretch. So if I change this to align items stretch, this is something people often ask me, how do I get, if I have so many columns in a page, how do I get them all the same height no matter how much text is in them, right? And before this was only possible really with JavaScript by figuring out the highest one and then looping through and setting them all to the same height. Now with align item stretch, that does it for you, right? So that's, if you don't say anything, align items defaults to stretch. But if you say flex start, you get height auto, and then they all jam up to the start of the flex box on the cross axis, right? Because if this flex box, the primary axis is horizontally, row, right? The cross axis is the vertical align. This is hard to wrap your head around because if you set the primary axis to column and then this would adjust how they arrange themselves left to right, right?
These are inversely proportional.
Sorry?
Inversely proportional, like not directly. Like if we go for column, this would set themselves by row, right?
The default is row. Yes, yes. So so where this gets crazy is if I change flex direction from row to column, that vertical becomes the primary axis, and now the align items becomes the secondary axis, which is horizontal. That's a little less easy. It's not as hard to see because then the width is not variable. But if I change the width and I set this to auto for the width, then you can see. I've just inverted the whole situation. If you're like your mind's like, that's all right. Like this is totally foreign to anything we've done with CSS layout. Okay, it has no bearing. Forget everything. Forget all that finishing and float stuff. Okay, so anyway, I'll undo that. So all of these boxes will be width 200 pixels, and the primary axis will be not vertically column, but I'll put it back to row, just so we can see this, and then we'll see how it works. Okay, so that's they're all starting aligning along the top. Now I can go back here and say, okay, well, what if I want to align them to the flex end? What does that look like? Oh, that's cool, right? Try that with positioning. Try that with floats. Good luck, right? It can be done, but a little bit more code. What if I said align? What if I said center? Never before possible. That's cool. I like that, right? Baseline. I'm not sure what this will work out because we have multiple lines of text inside these elements. Yeah, so that's kind of like text align top. And then, of course, stretch is the, stretch just says make them all the same height, right? All right, so that's cool. Now what I'll do is I'll go and do it column to row instead of row to column, okay? Stick with me. Change the flex direction back. We're going to say now column, where the flex box goes vertically now, okay? In order to do this, I want to see set the width to auto, so it auto sizes to the amount of text. Now it's stretch box or flex box from top to bottom, right? That's cool. And stretch is the default. So now I'll change this to flex start. Right? They're variable widths. Now I'll go flex end. Okay. Now I'll go center. So I'm doing the exact same thing as I did before. But the other, rotate it 90 degrees. That's it, right? And then, yeah, flex, start, and stretch is the, and baseline. I don't know how that would work because the text is not, it's, I don't know. I don't know what that'll do. Yeah, it doesn't really, it's kind of, all right. So there we go. So I'll put this, the width of these back to 200 px. Align items, flex start. There you go. And I'll change the flex box from vertical to horizontal with flex direction row. Okay. You're probably going to be like, what in the heck? Why would I ever do this stuff? You're going, you know, there's a module called CSS Columns that really never really took off. I'll show you. Let's see here. Where's my can I use? Can I use CSS column? 0 results found. Columns. No, that's not what I want. Oh, multiple column layout. Yeah, here's the issue with columns. We do have a way in CSS of arranging an element or the content in an element in columns, but we didn't really get consensus on how that looked. So we have partial support in Firefox. It sort of works. Anyway, we'll take a look at columns a little bit later, but this is a little bit more powerful and flexible than columns. They're sort of this. They're similar, but they're quite different. Cool. Okay, so flex direction. That's cool. Where did I get to? Flex item 5, step 6. Where did I put step 6? Oh, specify how they will be. How do I get rid of this? View. Toggle word wrap. Step 6. Actually, will be reflow when there's extra space in the cross axis. Okay, so when there is right now there is not extra space in the cross axis. So hang on a sec. I have to put the things back to some degree. Let's change the justify or the align items. Change the align items back to stretch. Justify content to flex start. So we'll change the justify content to flex start. Oh, we'll change the line items. I apologize. We have to change these to flex start. Oh no, justify content. Yeah, flex start. I'm going to see if I can. Sometimes these are difficult to visualize unless you have the right parameters. So set your justify content to flex start. Your line items to flex start. Okay, so that's fine. So how flex children will be reflowed when there's extra space in the cross axis. So we have, okay, so now we have to change. Now the cross axis, of course, is the height of this gray box, right? There is no extra space right now because the height is set to auto, right? So it automatically will grow to encompass the largest child, which is this third element, this green box. What if there's extra space, right? So let's go ahead, set the FlexContainer. We'll go up to the top here. Oh, sorry. Well, first of all, we'll set align content. Align content. And we'll set this to space. Let's say space around, for example. I'm not sure if that will do anything right now. No, it won't because there's no extra space. Now, if I set the height of this element, so go up the top to step 6A. Increase the width of the flex children in step B. So change the width of the children to, say, 300 pixels. Bear with me. This is crazy, I know. Step 6B. Step 6C. Change the justify content back to stretch. Stretch. Got to spell it right. Step 6C. Hopefully this allows us to visualize this strange property. And now we're going to set the height, step 6D, the height of the entire container, Flexbox container, which is the div. Yep.
I don't think justify content has stretch.
Justify content?
Doesn't have stretch. It's a line item.
Oh. Oh, okay. Back to. You're right. My mistake. What is the default? Space between, space around. Flex. Yeah, okay. Leave it back at flex start. I messed that up. I told you that you'd be a crash test dummy for this one. Yeah, thanks. That would actually break something. Okay, so do that. Now in step 16, we're going to set the height of the flex container to fill the whole window. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the height property on this, and we're going to say 100 VH. That means 100% of the viewport height. That means it doesn't matter how much stuff is in this box, set it to 100% of the window height, the viewport. So that's the corollary, that's the other part to viewport width, is viewport height. So now we'll refresh that. So now, this gray box, as you can see, stretches to the entire height of the window. 100%, 100 VH. So now when we're wrapping to a new line, when these break to a new line, this property here governs how much, what do we do these with these vertically, right? Here, I'll stretch this out a little bit. There's 2 rows, there's 3 rows. So we now have to go down to step 6A. We have align content space around. Now I can say space between, for example. That'll get rid of the little extra spot at the top and the bottom, so only space. There'll only be space between the rows when they wrap, right? And then, or we can just say center. How come that didn't center? Oh, okay. Interesting.
So as just we do align items as stretch, then it would be that.
Align items as stretch. Oh, this one. Maybe that's what I wanted step 6 to be. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, because maybe that would help us. Let's try that. I appreciate that suggestion. Let's say stretch here. It's hard to, in order to really understand what this is doing, you need to be able to see what it's doing, and sometimes that's really hard. That's really hard to do. Yeah, that is better. Thank you, Raj. That's helpful. Yeah, so there's this center. Yeah, that's good, because then we get rid of the different heights, which are kind of clouding the issue. So then if I go back here to align content center, say space around. Yeah, that's cool. I mean, the different permutations are endless, right? But you can see how from a standpoint of, geez, I've got content that I want to organize, and I don't know what the window environment is going to look like. I need to just arrange these so that they look good, and no matter what the scenario is, right? That's pretty cool. Okay, I'm just going to do one. I think it's one or two more things, then I'll let you go on a break, because your brain's probably sore at this point. No, mine was. Step 6. Oh, step 7. Oh, you know what? This is a good time to take a break, because now, okay, this is a good time to take a break, because what we'll do next is we'll now look at some of the properties we can do individually on the children inside the box. All of the work we've done has just been properties on the container, the Flex container, not on the Flex children or the Flex items. So we'll take a break. We'll come back and see all the different ways we can move, chuck those around, do all kinds of fun stuff, and then we'll get on to Grid, right? Which is even crazier. Easier, but crazier. Cool. All right, take a breather. Cool. Okay, so now we can look at moving on to look at the properties for the children. So we have referring to this most excellent guide from Chris Coyer. So now we're looking at all of the properties that we've talked about now apply to this purple box here. So the containing, what we call the Flex container. Now we're going to look at the Flex items, so the actual elements inside, and we can actually be a bit more specific about how they respond to a flexible environment, right, and how they behave. So these are called the Flex items. So this is kind of neat. So we'll head down here and to our code here. We can actually change the order in which the children appear. Now this would have been very, very hard to do with just floats and positioning, and you can do it, but it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of thought. It's not going to be particularly stable when you change the width of the screen or change devices or things like that. We can actually say, take the third item and put that number 1, take the fourth item, put that at the end, take the fifth item, put that second, and we can arbitrarily just scramble these up and order them any way I like. So for example, on our interface, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So let's go div nth of type 1. This will be the red one, the reddish brown colored one. And we just use the order property like that, and we'll say the first one, let's make that order 2. The second one, we'll say order, we'll put that at the end, 5. The third one, I'll put that in the number 1 position. The fourth, I gotta keep track of this, 2, 1, 5, we'll put that in the 3rd position. And I only have, and then the 5th one, I'll put order 4, is that right? 4, do I use them all? Order 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah. Just plot them out in the order you want. There you go. Awesome, right? That's easy. I mean, you can still, and then still on the FlexContainer, I can take that order they plotted out and then swap it around, right? Sure, whatever you want. Cool, so that's step 7. Step 8, we can now control how each of the children are sized with FlexGrow. Now this is a little bit different. What have I got did I hard code a width on these things? I think I did. I wonder if anyway, okay, well, let's go to the FlexGrow property. So the idea behind the FlexGrow property here is, imagine if you have, say in this kind of six items that break to a new row. The FlexGrow number is basically a proportion. So in this case, it's saying that the 5th item here will take up double the space that the other 2 items will in the row. How can I best describe this? This is a bit harder to demonstrate how it works. Because our width is hard-coded. Width, what do we say here? Let's comment out the width property entirely. Up here on the flex body div. Just comment that out. So now we don't have a specified width. And let's go down here to FlexGrow. And we'll set the first one, I don't know, or is this number 2? Let's set this one to double the size. Let's set this one FlexGrow single. This is order number 2. Okay. Let's set the third one, the first one. Set this one to 1. We'll set this one to FlexGrow to 1. And the fourth one, FlexGrow, set it to 3. Oh. No, I don't think. I'm trying to think I can demo this, I guess. The problem is the width is 100%. So this is. What if we set the width to? I don't know. 25%. See if that. Yeah. To some degree. Yeah. So then this purple one here is is that 3 times the size of this? Not really. I'm trying to think about how that. Yeah, that one I kind of have a difficult one to kind of demonstrate. Anyway, and flex shrink. I just don't understand how that works at all yet. So I'm still trying to wrap my head around flex shrink. One day I'll get my head around flex shrink, but I still haven't got my head around that one. Flex basis 2. This is an interesting one. Defines the default size of an element before the remaining space is distributed. Yeah, so I'm not sure I completely understand how that works either, too. But anyway, FlexGraph, and then of course you can use shorthands for these things in Flex. But what I do want to, what I will focus is on where we have the alignment property that we set on the parent. We can set exceptions to individual elements or flex children or flex items inside. So say we want all of them to align up to the top, right? But just this case, the third one on the bottom. So we can change that. So we have to change a few things to get that to work. So let me say, let's comment out this stuff here. You can use Control right-leaning / or Command /. Let's comment out the order and flex grow stuff on each of them, and then we'll be able to see these other properties. So comment them out rather than blowing them away. Comment out the order and the flex grow properties on each of those divs and the types. And that should give us that. Okay. Now I need the height to be auto. So now I need to head back up here. Align items. So I need to change the align items instead of stretch. On step 5, change this to flex start. So change that property on the parent, which is the flex body div. There, change that. And that should change them so they're height auto now. And if I zoom this out a bit, you can see how the, I guess not. Okay, so now I can target, say I want to target one of these, order, flex grow. Okay, so step 10.8, set a particular flex child differently than the align with align self. Okay, so change on the div nth of type number 4. Does that make sense? 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's do it on number 2 here on the second one. Up here under dark orange, we'll set the align self. And we'll set this to flex end in this case. So they're all flex start. This one will bump this one down to the flex end on the vertical axis, right? So you can change the behavior, or I can say, I think I could change this to stretch as well if I wanted to. Right? So we can handle exceptions to the rule too as well. Note that float, clear, and vertical align have no effect on a flex item. We were talking about a totally different way of thinking about things. Okay? If you'd like, there is a super cool game called Flexbox Froggy. If you have if you want to try your hand to get better at Flexbox. For example, this one here, I want to say justify content. The idea is to put the frog on the lily pad. Now you justify content, flex, end, and then off you go to the next challenge. Right? And I wrote, in this case, I would do justify content, and off you go. I think there's like 24 challenges, so it's kind of a fun little game. So if you want to get better at Flexbox Froggy, I'll post a link up there in the module. Anyway, so there you go. There's Flexbox, a really super good tool for arranging content flexibly when you're in a very liquid environment, or even if you're not, just for organizing and laying things out. The support for Flexbox is awesome. Really good. Now, cool, on to Grid. So Grid, we're going to use the same main.css, but what I want you to do now is open up grid.html. And I'll show you the markup. So same idea, except that I've used on this piece of on this template, I put an ID on the HTML on the root node ID grid. This is so I can target this page with the same piece of CSS. Okay, so we're going to use the same piece, the same main.css file to style the grid on this page. The markup, again, super simple. I'll go into View Word Wrap. So what have I got? I've got a div class equal container. I don't have to put a class on that. I could just use a div. But I've just decided to, just for simplicity's sake, add some classes in here. So these are all class items. Item A, item B, item C, D, E. But the structure is the same thing. So what I've got is I've got a container div, right, with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 children. That's it. So again, I've made no assumptions based on, I'm using divs. That doesn't necessarily mean you use divs in your code. You use the right structural markup for the job. But suffice it to say, I have a container and I have 5 boxes, 5 elements inside of it. These, the content in here is really, I've just put content there so you can get a sense of how it might flow. That's it. But really, we've got one element with 5 elements inside. So what we want to do is we want to plot this out in a grid. So if we can imagine a grid layout where we have rows and columns, and that grid, so we have grid lines, and then we have spaces between those grid lines, which are called tracks. Okay, so we want to plot these items out in a plot them out on a grid where we want them on that grid, irrespective of where they sit in the markup. Right? See if I can pull up the CSS grid. I'll get this link up on. So, in the same vein, Chris House, as a regular contributor to Chris Coyer's CSS Tricks, has put together a very comprehensive guide to grid, which in not so many ways, he's put it in the similar ideas. We have a grid container, and we have grid items. So we're gonna follow some of the same logic here, but you're gonna find that this is a much more, in a lot of ways, this would kind of serve for like where you might put a set of, you might put a Flexbox element inside a grid item, right? This will be like the overarching kind of matrix upon which you'll build your layout. So we have our grid container and our grid items. The most important thing to understand with Grid is, perhaps this slide or this image shows it best. What you do is you define, behind here you can see kind of a pale kind of set of grid lines. You define a grid on the container. And then the children, you plot them on that grid. You define what zones of that grid consist of what parts of your layout, and you drop them in. Right? That's pretty much it. So, and that grid can be expandable, it can be liquid, it can be a fixed layout. You can have as many columns and rows as you want. You can apply space between those columns and rows, which in graphic design terms we would call gutters. Right? So you can apply gutters to the grid lines. You can control the heights and widths of the tracks or the rows and columns. And these, the header doesn't necessarily need to be the first child inside that grid container. It can be the last. It doesn't matter. You just plot it wherever you want. So the real benefit here is, as always with CSS, the source order in your HTML doesn't matter. This is the ultimate in flexibility. This is so cool. And yeah, it almost brings tears to my eyes. I'm like, wow, I've been waiting for this for a really long time. And so it actually works. I almost don't believe it now. Really? This really works? I can use it? Yeah, you can. What? No, you can't. Come on, there's got to be a catch. No, it just works, right? It works. So this is completely amazing. So anyway, we'll show you how this works, and hopefully you'll be as amazed as I am, because this is pretty cool. So anyway, and my markup, I mean, I can even simplify the markup. I don't need all these classes at all. I can strip things away if I wanted to, build some smarter selections. So let's go here. Let's go down to, so we're down here now about line 183 or 184. I've got a little heading here for grid. Cool. So we'll head down where we start. We're going to start at step 11. Okay, so I'm using the ID grid here, and all that does is refers to so that I'm styling this elements on this page instead of the other page. So let's pull up the grid page on our browser. So instead of Flexbox, let's open up Grid. I know I use crazy colors and all that stuff. It kind of, whoa, geez. This is just to make it a little bit easier to visualize what things are happening. Right? Okay. So bear with me as I'm new to this, so help me out here if you must. Okay, grid. So on our grid container, so in the grid here, I haven't said anything. The grid container is just a series of comments, so there's actually nothing on the class container element. We don't have any rules on there. Above that, though, I did set the grid items. So each of those, any and all divs inside the grid, I took that off, so I'm hiding that for now. But each of those, so I've used classes instead of nth child. I could have used that nth child if I wanted to. But I used those class, and I just gave them RGB alpha values just for the colors, that's all. So that's all the code you've got right now. So all we simply do here on the grid container is define this as the grid container itself, right? That's all we do. So we use the display property. We set display to grid. That's cool, but that on its own does a little bit of something, but it doesn't create the grid layout. Okay. Now we have to actually be very specific about how many columns we want in our grid. Now we can have more columns in our grid than we actually might have content blocks in our page template or our interface template. So our interface, we may only have a 3-column 3 columns, we could put 12 columns on our grid. And if each of those elements, some of them might take 4 columns, some may take 3, so on and so forth. So we can build that grid much like the Bootstrap grid system has. Was it 12? Remember 12 columns, right? We could do that. We could set 12 columns and span however many. So we won't get all that crazy though. We'll how it works is grid dash template dash columns. So this is where we're describing what they look like. Now we can use anything we want. In this case, I'm just going to set them at 25%, 25%, and 25%. So I'll keep it simple for now. You can use pixels, inches, centimeters, points, picas, rems, ems, whatever you want. I don't care. You can use whatever is appropriate for your layout. Okay? There's no restrictions on what the units might be. Cool. Now, of course, we need to define those rows. Right? It's a grid. So, and as you can imagine, grid template. Look at that. You know it's a good sign if your code editor is actually providing you with suggestions on some of the stuff that probably the support's reasonable, right? Not always. Sometimes you're dealing with stuff that's pretty new, and make sure you test it. But support for this is pretty good. So I can plot these out in the very same way, or what I can just do is I can do auto. Automatic just basically says height auto on whatever the content is, right? Or I could plot them out if I want, right? So I could say, well, I don't know, 100 px, 200 px, 150 px, right? I can plot those out if I want. We'll just do auto to keep it simple, so that it sizes auto to the content of my what I've got there. Okay. Okay. Here's where the magic comes in. All right. This is where. So now I've got good template rows. Let me just thinking aloud here. Should I plot these out as on a 4x4? Hmm. One, two. No. I'll leave it. I'll leave it for now. Let's just say. No. Let's just say we have 3 rows. I'll show you why in a second. So now I want you to imagine then we have a grid now like this on the grid container with 4 columns. Okay. The grid rows are auto, and how this works is we define, we plot this stuff out. Let's just say I'm going to tell you now that it's got 3 rows. This is where I'm a little bit foggy on how this works with auto, but we'll try it anyway. So now we're going to say grid template areas. And I'm going to go to a new line and tab in. I'll show you why. So what I'll do is I'll have put in quotes here, and we're going to say header, 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 header. Go to a new line. What? That's weird. Yes, this is weird syntax. Okay. Then I'm going to say navigation, main, sidebar. Now I'm going to say next line, footer, footer, footer. And I'll close off with a semicolon. So each of these with auto, I think this is the way this works. That means we generate the number of rows based on the grid template areas. So this is basically row 1, row 2, and row 3. So what we're saying in our template here, the header spans 4 columns, right? The navigation spans 1. The main spans 2. Sidebar and footer. That's it. You basically just describe your template right there. And you don't have to use these. You can use numbers or letters. You can say A, zone A, B, C, D, E, and F. If you wanted to keep this, you can. It just depends. So I'm not using header in the sense of the HTML word or main in this. I'm not referring to the HTML element header, right? I'm just describing these arbitrarily based on their function, right? So now I've plotted this out. Okay, so that's cool. Step 15, and now you'll see that this has still, if I reflog the page here, okay, we do get some change to our layout, but what we need to do now is we have to associate each of these elements here. So I need to plot, say, which of these are which of these. I just associate each element with the template. Okay? Don't overthink it. It's actually easier than it sounds. So, so for example, I'll go in back here and we'll say, okay, so the grid item A is our header, right? I want my header content here. So this is grid item class item A. So what I do is item A, and I use grid area header. So the next one is the class item B, and the class item B has my sidebar content. Okay, so then I say, okay, class item B, I associate this with the grid area that I've defined as the sidebar. So these are user defined.
We don't need to put those in quotes?
No. I don't think so. I don't think I need to put, no, I don't think so. Yeah. Okay, so the next one is main, so I have to refer back here. So my main content here is item C, class item C. Main, semicolon. And then item D, refer back to your HTML. The footer here, item D. So class item D, grid area, whoops, footer. And notice how, even though my navigation, I want it up here, in my markup it's the end. It's the last one in this set of elements. It doesn't matter what the order is in my HTML. I just associate it with an element. So I go here and say, all right, so for the class.item E, sure enough, the navigation is the last div in my source code. Oops. Grid navigation. So even though it's the last there, I can plot it right here in my grid. So this is actually an illustration of your grid right there. That's basically what it is. You're drawing out your grid right there. Then you're sizing it with the columns and rows. I'll check. We're going to come back and see if I can resize the rows by manipulating this. Yeah?
Instead of repeating 25% 4 times, you can just say, what was it? Repeat. Yeah, repeat more 25%.
Yes. Yes, I can do.
Functions.
Yes. Yeah. I was looking at that, going, I don't know when that would be useful, but if you. We're talking about a very simple grid here. If you're getting to something where you're doing like a bootstrap kind of 12 column grid situation, then you're going to want to like leverage some of those tools. I totally agree. Let me solve. We'll come back to that. Let me solve the rows height issue because I'm not sure I fully understand how that works. So there. So now even though the navigation is the last item in my markup, it doesn't matter. If I want to slap around, if I want to move around my navigation with the sidebar, maybe I want to put, yeah, this is cool. So maybe I want the sidebar here. Maybe I want the navigation down here. Maybe I want the main to span 3 columns. That is so cool. We have been waiting for this for a very, very long time. I can now plot my whole layout any way I want by just moving a few bits of code. Right? I mean, just think about that for a quick second. Think about how awesome that is. How easy that is. Right? I want you to think about what that would have to entail with floats and clears and positioning. Right? Then you have to think about source order. Right? Now you can optimize your HTML for search engines and accessibility, not for layout. For speed, not for layout. Let the CSS handle the visuals. That's incredible. That's nothing short of incredible. And the fact that we can now use that today, really, effectively, is going to make your lives easier. And I want you to take this stuff and make better stuff than we've got right now. Make web apps better. We're just at the very cusp of being able to make super lean, mean web apps that work really. They're fast. They're quick. This is going to improve performance. This is going to improve everything. There's so much. Modern web apps very often have a lot of weight. There's a lot of weight in the app is devoted to things like layout. This just takes that and just blows it all away. So this is the one thing. Now I don't know. I've never tried this. I'm assuming the auto here now refers to these and just sets up with 3 rows and sets the height based on the content. I'm guessing. But now I'm thinking I could probably change the rows here and I could say 500 pixels. The next one I could say 1000 pixels and 200 px. I'm just guessing. Outstanding. Yeah, so I can now, yeah.
Oh, Scott?
Yep.
Should we be using percent or fractions? Fractions are like immune to margin errors.
Yes. If you're a mathematician, you'll like fractions. It's kind of like the difference between using radians versus degrees. It's kind of the same kind of. So yeah, I guess it depends. Depends on what the standards are wherever you're working. If maybe they'll have a standard approach to their templates that you should probably follow suit. maybe you should make suggestions when you're there and say, hey, this is a better way to do it. Oh yeah, make your case and change it. Well, that now it comes down to politics, right? How to be smart and how to present your case without ruffling feathers. That's maybe some of the more subtleties of office politics, right? But I mean, I'm kind of this is cool. This is crazy cool. Yeah, I'm without words. This is amazing. This is really something else. I guess I could change the columns up here. What was it? What was the syntax here? Say I wanted to repeat 4, comma. Whoops! What did I do? Give me my window back. Crazy Windows. Here we go. All right. There we go. This is fun. Yeah. Change nothing, yeah. So it should change nothing. That's good. So what if I said repeat 3 at 20%? Could I do this? 20%. And then the last one, of course, a column would be 40. Would that work? So that's 20, 20, 20, and 40. Yeah. Pretty neat. Crazy stuff. Yeah. Wow. So, but it gets better. It gets better than this even. So, say I've got a grid here, and the grid lines. I mean, the grid. There's your grid tracks, what they call, and there's your grid lines. The grid lines are largely invisible, but if I wanted to add gutters and spaces here, I can set the gutters between the column tracks with grid column gap here, and I can say, I don't know, what should I say, 5%. Maybe I'll make it 2%. You can say points, pixels, ems. You wanted to keep it in a typographic. Say your typography is fairly tight. You want to keep that typographic measure consistent. Use a point or ems or ends or something like that. That's cool, or what have you. So I can do that, and then of course I can also set the gutters with respect to the row tracks. Between the row tracks, and say grid row gap. I don't know, 10 px in this case.
Pretty cool how the inspector actually shows the grid. Looks like.
Oh, I've never even looked at the inspector. Wow. That's fantastic. That's really cool. So anyway, is this the end of, you can say, well, is this the end of Bootstrap Grid?
No, it's just starting, I think.
No?
I don't know.
Are you going to use Bootstrap Grid? Are you going to jump into this instead?
Well, if you can just add a class, when you're thinking about efficiency when it comes to coding the website itself, if you want to do it quickly, adding a class is way simpler than opening a CSS file and then figuring it out.
Yeah, there's a reason why frameworks were built,
Yeah.
right? It does make it easy. And a lot of thought went into the grid. I think frameworks will adopt this as the engine that powers them, is what will happen, right? You can go ahead, I mean, if maybe you're building I think of web applications that include fairly sophisticated interfaces. One of my favorite is, oops, where's Spotify? is Spotify. I don't want to go premium. Come on, let me in. Let me in. Can I log in? Oh, web player. Oh, the web player. Oh, okay. For example, and then no, I'm not going to forget what my password is. You let me in? No, I forget my password. Anyway, the yeah, things like you know, more complicated, more complex interfaces that you know have a lot of information, and there's a lot of context to that information. This is where you're really going to want to leverage something like a grid, right? Very cool. I'm amazed. I am blown away.
Scott,
Yes.
how can we get white space? Like I want some white space on the slide.
Oh, on the side?
Is it good if we put like header on top with four columns? Can you just
Where?
Well, wouldn't you put a margin on the grid container? I'm think maybe it's as easy as
You mean like with 50% in margin auto?
well, it's just a box, I guess. I'm not sure if that's best practice or not.
Like just like don't use
Oh, hold on a sec. Huh. Why is my width? Why am I scrolling off the screen?
I guess it's percentage.
Oh, because it's added that to the.
To see if you were using fractions, there would not be a problem.
Yeah, fractions mathematically are better. This because I'm mixing oil and water, right? I'm mixing percentages and fixed units. And
Yeah.
that's when it gets into I'm using m's and percentages and all that kind of stuff. So maybe that's not the best.
So maybe something like with 80% in margin auto. Literally, let's drop container.
Yeah, pretty much.
Can we just create like an empty?
I've still got this.
area?
Sorry?
Can you create like an empty div? Set it like a grid area, new area.
I could.
Set up on the grid.
Hang on a second. I have a feeling we're working hard
Yeah.
and not smart.
Like that empty space in the div.
Hang on a sec. There's got to be grid column gap, row gap, not on the outer edges. What is grid gap? Oh, shorthand. So what we're looking for is how do I add the white, the gutter here and here and here and here as well,
Yeah, outside the grid.
outside the grid.
Border grid.
Justify items.
Everything's on the grid, inside the grid.
Everything's inside the grid. Yeah. Justify content, grid container, grid container.
Yeah, there you go.
Justify content?
It's right on.
That's horizontally. Okay. I guess then you'd want to split this difference with center, right? Justify content space around. Just like the Flexbox. So let's try this. Hold on. Something's wrong.
These are 25%. If you put some white space, it will break.
Right.
100%. You need to adjust the percentage.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, I guess I could make them all. I could say. Repeat. I haven't quite got it working. Huh. Yeah. Sorry? Did I break it? Oh, maybe you're right. Haha. Thank you. So is that the answer? I guess so. That's probably better than looking at padding or margin on the grid container. Because now we're thinking, remember it's a paradigm shift. We have to change the way we think about the layout. We can't think in these old terms, right? We have to think about grid and the properties that come with that ship with it. Yeah, I think this is the answer to that, is justify content. Huh. Cool. All right. Let me pass this one out here. Send that back. All right, so Lab 7, your mission, should you choose to accept it. So what I want you to do is open up lab7.html. It's already in your lesson files. Okay? I want you to look at this illustration below right here. And I want you to build out the grid rows and columns using an appropriate CSS selector and declaration for the grid container. So define your grid container and plot out the grids and columns for this. Inside that rule, specify the content areas. So your branding, your local nav, top story, global nav, advertising 1, search, advertising 2, market info, and footer. Plot those out. Right? Step 3, inside, oh yeah, I've already done that. Oh, watch for merged cells on the grid, right? Some of those are merged. Then step 4, associate each of the grid items with the appropriate grid template areas. And set a background color that resembles this just for reference sake. Add a little bit of a gutter space between the grids and rows and columns. So build this using the grid, using the provided HTML. So the provided HTML is here already in lab7.html. So lab 7, there you go. So you'll have to add a container div to surround all these. But there is each of your items with a class, item A, item B, item C, and the headings. So you'll need to, yeah, you can create a new CSS if you want, or you can add an ID to this. Equal lab7. If you want, use the same main.css, right? The same way I did. But you will have to put a wrapper for the grid container around these. So you have to put a div and wrap all of those divs inside. Oh, I didn't give you a start tag. I just gave you an end tag. Oh. I broke your HTML. You'll need a start tag. There's your end tag. Your end tag's already there. My formatting is terrible. There we go. Okay, so add this to lab7.html. You can build your own piece of CSS, or you can put an ID lab7 and put it in the main.css if you want. So in this case, then you would then do, how would it go? ID lab7.container. It's good. Very good.
I was looking for something different from the file, but yes. Grid row. I never used this.
Nope. Nope.
I was confused by it, but it works.
And that's fractions.
Yeah.
3 and 6. Okay. Is that what you plot each item in? Oh, okay. So you're plotting the item from the item itself rather than.
No. It is in relation to the grid.
Yeah. So show me the grid container. Here, I'm just gonna save this.